in early October 1951, amid the rugged mountain ranges along the banks of the Imjin River in central Korea. The Battle of Maryang San unfolded. During this fierce engagement, the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment executed a sweeping tactical maneuver, a brilliant right hook that shattered the defenses of the CCF 191st Division. This battle remains a powerful testament to the extraordinary skill and unwavering determination of the Australian Army during the Korean War. Francis George Hassett, commander of the 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment during the Battle of Maryang San, said,
"That attack is the finest infantry battalion attack in British history, and others have said something similar."
Historian Robert O'Neill characterised the battle as
the greatest single feat of the Australian Army during the Korean War.
Even the Chinese conceded that it was this very tactical approach that enabled the Australian Army to seize the initiative on the battlefield.
At the time, we estimated that the enemy intended to attack Maryang San, with the objective of their offensive against the 572nd Regiment being to encircle Maryang San. Our defenses were primarily concentrated on the right flank to counter the enemy's encirclement. However, we did not anticipate that the enemy would outflank us from the east, advancing from the direction of Suuksi.
Based on reports, accounts, and historical records from both sides, this video aims to comprehensively explore the details of the Battle of Maryang San, one of the most significant battlefield accomplishments in the history of the Australian military. The map we use to locate units is sheet 6528-2 from AMS series L751, which precisely aligns with the grid references found in the war diaries of 3 RAR, the 28th Commonwealth Brigade, and the 1st Commonwealth Division. Hill 317 Maryang San rose sharply from the northeastern tip of a T-shaped ridgeline. Its conical slopes presented steep and unforgiving approaches. Despite being smaller in area and lower in elevation than Hill 355 Khawang San, Hill 317 Maryang San was widely regarded as a far more challenging objective for any attacking force.
The position of Maryang San was of critical importance, serving as a commanding high point in the region. If we held it, we could dominate the enemy's deep positions. Conversely, if the enemy controlled it, they would gain the ability to threaten our defenses and penetrate deep into our territory. It was, without question, a terrain worth fighting for.
In September 1951, the U.S. First Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General John O'Daniel, formulated Operation Commando, aiming to advance the front line from the Wyoming Line to the Jamestown Line. General Van Fleet, commander of the 8th Army, approved this plan. As part of the operation, the 1st Commonwealth Division, commanded by Major General James Castles, was tasked with advancing an average of 5 kilometers, clearing several key features across its front. The division's area of responsibility stretched from the Samakon River in the west to the northernmost pronounced bend of the Imjin River in the east. Altogether, the divisional objective spanned a 15-kilometer wide front. The 1st Commonwealth Division consisted of the 25th Canadian Brigade, the 28th Commonwealth Brigade, and the 29th British Brigade. Within the 28th Commonwealth Brigade were the 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, the 1st Battalion, King's Own Scottish Borderers, and the 1st Battalion, King's Shropshire Light Infantry. Supporting the brigade was the 16th Field Regiment, Royal New Zealand Artillery, organised into 3 batteries, the 161st, 162nd, and 163rd, each armed with 8 25-pounder field guns. The 28th Brigade also received support from the 8th King's Royal Irish Hussars and the 170th Mortar Battery, Royal Artillery. The 8th Hussars were equipped with 3 squadrons of Centurion Mark III tanks and a reconnaissance troop of Cromwells. The 170th Mortar Battery comprised 3 troops equipped with British ML 4.2-inch mortars. Together, these powerful tanks and mortars provided crucial fire support. The brigade commander was Brigadier George Taylor. The 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, like British battalions of the time, comprised a battalion headquarters, a headquarters company with a signals and administration platoon, a support company containing mortar, machine gun, anti-armor, and assault pioneer platoons, and 4 rifle companies, each with 3 rifle platoons. Each rifle platoon was organized into 3 sections, each nominally consisting of 10 men. The authorized strength was 37 officers and 906 other ranks. On October 4, 3 RAR's posted strength, including attached units, was reported as 1,018 across all ranks. Of these, 92 men were not present with the battalion, including 69 on leave in Japan. When Operation Commando began, 3 RAR's actual strength slightly exceeded 900 personnel. The opposing force was the CCF 64th Corps, commanded by Zhang Siyu, which comprised the 190th, 191st, and 192nd Divisions. The 191st Division, commanded by Xia Jingrong, was ordered to conduct a relief in place with the 192nd Division on September 17, completing the operation by September 20. The 191st Division deployed 2 regiments to the front, the 571st Regiment in the north, defending areas including Maryang San, and the 572nd Regiment in the south. The 573rd Regiment was held in reserve. The division suffered heavy casualties during the battles of April and May 1951. Despite receiving reinforcements in June and July, its strength was now just over 6,000 across all ranks. The 191st Division received support from the 31st Artillery Regiment, the 40th Artillery Regiment, the Divisional Artillery of the 192nd Division, and the 29th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion. Believing the UN forces would strike their right flank toward Kuori, the CCF designated that sector as their primary defensive front, assigning 7 artillery batteries to support the 572nd Regiment and only 2 to the 571st Regiment.
By late September, after more than a month of intensive construction, the units had established a relatively complete strongpoint-based defensive system, centered on tunnels and reinforced with trenches, communication trenches, and bunkers. One day, I received a call from Army Commander Yang Deji, instructing me to prepare as the UN forces were on the verge of launching an attack.
General James Castles, commander of the 1st Commonwealth Division, planned to assign the 25th Canadian Brigade to capture the Samakon River ridges in the west, and the 28th Brigade to secure key terrain in the east, including Hill 355. Rather than deploying the 29th Brigade as a unified formation, Castles decided to use its battalions individually in support of the 25th and 28th Brigades. He devised a 3-phase operation. Phase 1. D-Day, October 3rd, 28th Brigade, reinforced by the 1st Battalion, Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, 1 RNF, and 2 squadrons of tanks from 8 Hussars would capture Kaohsiung San, Hill 355, and key features to the south and east. Phase 2. D+1 Day, October 4th, 25th Canadian Brigade, reinforced by the 1st Battalion, Royal Ulster Rifles, 1 RUR, would capture the line of hills overlooking the Samakon tributary. Phase 3. D+2 Day, October 5th, both brigades would continue to clear key terrain forward to the Jamestown line.
I knew that I had well-trained and aggressive troops who could, and would, achieve anything that was reasonably demanded of them.
Brigadier Taylor, the commander of the 28th Brigade, after coordinating battalions, made the brigade plan meshing with the division plan. For Commando 1, to be launched on October 3rd, 3 RAR would create a base on Hill 238 while 2 companies secured Hill 199. From this feature, the 3 RAR would be able to support the 1 KOSB assault on Hill 355 Kaohsiung San. On October 5th, as part of Commando 2, while 1 RNF would attack Hill 217 from the south, 3 RAR would conduct its flanking march and assault Hill 317 along the ridges from the east. 3 RAR's extended outflanking maneuver significantly caught the Chinese forces off guard during the ensuing battle. On October 1, the 28th Brigade advanced into the northern portion of the divisional area of operations. On October 2, 3 RAR-D Company, which was held in reserve for the division, occupied positions northeast of Hill 183. A troop of Centurion tanks moved forward and linked up with B Company, preparing to advance in support. Meanwhile, both 1 KOSB and 1 KSLI repositioned into battalion areas closer to their respective objectives. At 0300 hours on October 3, over 120 guns and mortars, including 8-inch howitzers and both towed and self-propelled 155mm guns from the U.S. First Corps, opened fire on known or suspected enemy artillery positions, machine gun emplacements, and forming up places, FUPs. Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel Hassett assigned A and B companies the task of securing Hill 199 before dawn, around 5:45 a.m. B Company, under the command of Captain Nichols, began its movement at 3 a.m., crossing the Kojaniri Valley in heavy mist, followed by A Company, led by Captain Shelton, which started crossing at 5 a.m. Meanwhile, a troop of tanks began its advance at 5:45 a.m.
Fortunately, and it's a nice thing that happened, the tanks got away from us a bit. They couldn't tell where we were and, of course, we could only hear them down in the valley, and we'd started off pretty early in early morning fog, so you weren't able to see very much. There was an early morning mist. But all of a sudden, out of the blue, an officer turned up, and he was from the tanks with a wireless set, and he said, "I'm your liaison officer," and it turned out to be a New Zealand officer who'd been a cadet at Duntroon when I was there, a man called Jim Brown, lovely fellow, and he was attached to the 8th Hussars, the British tanks, so he turned up as our liaison officer, so he was able to talk to the tanks, tell them where we were exactly, and control their fire for us.
By 8 a.m., B Company had successfully reached Hill 199. Once the friendly artillery bombardment on the position ceased, B Company advanced westward to make contact. After a brief skirmish, during which 3 Australian soldiers were wounded, B Company secured Hill 199, eliminating 5 enemy soldiers and capturing 1. Meanwhile, 2 flights, each comprising 4 F-51s, struck CCF positions on Hill 317 and nearby Hill 280 with napalm, bombs, and cannon fire at 8:35 a.m. and 10:13 a.m. Reports indicated an enemy force of roughly battalion strength was dug in, with the first attack achieving an estimated 80% coverage and the second around 60%. Effective strafing was also reported north of Hill 317. A company of 3 RAR arrived at Hill 199 by 10 a.m. and immediately began digging in. By 10:30 a.m., the Centurion tank troop had navigated the rocky slopes to link up with B Company. By mid-morning on October 3, 3 RAR had successfully positioned 2 companies and a troop of Centurion tanks in the Hill 199 area. The tanks and machine guns opened fire on the rear slopes of Hill 355, providing support for the borderers' assault. C Company was near the southern edge of the valley. D Company advanced from its divisional reserve position and, by 2 p.m., had established itself near Hill 238. While 3 RAR was securing Hill 199, the Shropshires and the borderers commenced their assaults. The Shropshires advanced in the morning, facing stiff resistance and remaining approximately 1,000 meters east of Hill 210 by the afternoon. Meanwhile, the borderers had established 2 company footholds on the spur roughly 1 kilometer southeast of the Hill 355 feature. However, as nightfall approached, neither unit had fully achieved their objectives. Therefore, at the request of Brigadier Taylor, commander of the 28th Brigade, Lieutenant Colonel Hassett assigned C Company to launch an attack the following day on the CCF position at the 220 feature, northeast of Hill 355, which dominated the approach to the rear of Hill 355. This action was intended to support the borderers' assault on Hill 355. On October 3, one RNF advanced to a position approximately 2 kilometers southwest of 3 RAR and was placed under the command of the 28th Brigade. C Company, under the command of Captain Gerke, began its advance shortly after 5 a.m. By 7 a.m., the forward 7th Platoon, led by Lieutenant Pears, had approached a CCF position on the first 220 feature, approximately 500 meters east of their objective. The Australians pressed on, surging forward while firing their weapons and throwing grenades into the Chinese positions. Despite machine gun and mortar fire from the second 220 feature, C Company successfully secured the first feature by 10:15 a.m. Captain Gerke then ordered Lieutenant McWilliams' 8th Platoon to move forward and consolidate the newly captured position. Lieutenant Pembroke's 9th Platoon was also called forward, arriving at the first 220 feature by 11:30 a.m. With Captain Gerke leading the effort, the 7th and 8th Platoons launched an assault on the second 220 feature, C Company's main objective, and secured it by 12:15 p.m. The Chinese forces retreated in disarray. In the meantime, 1 KOSB attacked Hill 355 from the south, capturing it by 4:10 p.m. 1 KSLI continued its westward advance that afternoon, securing Hill 227 by 7 p.m. The Australians' action provided considerable assistance to 1 KOSB in capturing Hill 355, forming part of a pincer attack.
The enemy launched a full-scale offensive. Facing the 571st Regiment, they concentrated 4 battalions to attack and separate Maryang San from Maryang San. Due to the isolated position of Maryang San, which was exposed to attacks from 3 sides, its defense became untenable. This highlighted a weakness in our defensive deployment.
Meanwhile, at 5:20 p.m., a flight of 4 F-51s attacked the CCF position north to Quang Day, focusing on machine gun and emplacements and making 95% coverage. It caused several secondary explosions. All of the 28th Brigade's objectives for Commando 1st had been achieved, putting the divisional plan back on schedule. The Canadians successfully extended the divisional line to the south and secured several key features. For the CCF, it was evident that the UN forces would next target Hill 317, Maryang San.
At the headquarters of the 64th Corps, I paced back and forth before the operations map, contemplating our strategy. The enemy's intentions were obvious. Their primary objective was Maryang San, a position whose strategic importance I knew all too well. Picking up the phone, I placed a call to the 191st Division and spoke with its commander, Xie Jingrong. Comrade Jingrong, over the past 3 days, our troops have fought bravely and inflicted heavy losses on the enemy. The next step is to hold Maryang San at all costs and prevent the enemy from driving north. Are there any difficulties? Commander Xie replied, "Rest assured, Corps Commander. No matter the challenges, we will complete this mission."
During the night, the 191st Division reconfigured its deployment. Commander Xie Jingrong dispatched the 2nd Battalion of the 571st Regiment to positions around Hill 317 to reinforce the defense of Maryang San. He also assigned the 2nd Battalion of the 573rd Regiment as the 571st Regiment's reserve. In the meantime, the CCF's logistical support was in full swing, replenishing ammunition and water canteens. Some units even managed to deliver canned food to frontline positions by crossing the blockade. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett devised a cautious and meticulous plan for the offensive against Maryang San. A company would move south of Maryang San as a diversion. C Company would remain in reserve upon rejoining the battalion. Hassett designated Captain Nichols' B Company and Major Hardiman's D Company as the spearhead for the assault on the CCF position at Maryang San. Visibility in the morning was nearly zero due to a heavy river mist that persisted until around 11:20 a.m. The terrain was densely wooded and rugged, with very steep hills. B Company began moving through the fog at 4:45 a.m., taking advantage of the pre-dawn darkness for cover. As per the plan, Major Hardiman led his D Company out of the battalion position 30 minutes after B Company. Both companies advanced cautiously and slowly due to the heavy fog and challenging, uneven terrain. During this time, B Troop of the 8th Hussars tanks had carried the battalion's anti-tank platoon into the valley and then up onto Hill 120, where they were positioned to provide direct fire support for B and D Company. At the same time, on the southern flank, 1 RNF crossed the start line at 6 a.m. They advanced slowly toward Hill 217, reaching the foothill by 10:25 a.m. When they launched an assault after the preliminary bombardment lifted, they encountered stiff resistance from the 7th Company of the CCF 571st Regiment. Progress remained slow until noon. Simultaneously, B and D companies of the 3 RAR moved west. During the advance, B Company swung north, cresting a feature approximately 500 meters north of the main ridge. At about 9:15 a.m., they encountered a CCF position and captured the feature, killing 2 enemy soldiers at the cost of 1 Australian killed and another wounded. D Company, continuing along the main axis of the assault, proceeded west and made contact with CCF forces on a feature roughly 2,000 meters east of Hill 317, also at 9:15 a.m. However, dense fog made it difficult to pinpoint the Chinese position until it lifted after 11 a.m. At about 11:20 a.m., a fierce firefight broke out as D Company advanced up the steep slopes of a key feature toward a CCF position. Fortunately, the Chinese defenses were laterally arrayed and oriented to the south, which delayed their ability to quickly reposition against the threat on their eastern flank. In response, the enemy unleashed a barrage of small arms, grenades, and heavy machine gun fire. Undeterred, the Australians charged forward, breaking into the Chinese position and engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Within roughly 20 minutes, D Company had secured the feature, forcing the CCF to withdraw. During the battle, Major Hardiman was struck in the thigh by a burst of machine gun fire, and he relinquished command to Platoon Commander Lieutenant Young. D Company suffered casualties of 2 killed and 15 wounded, while inflicting heavy losses. Reportedly around 30 enemy soldiers were killed, 10 captured, and many more wounded. During this time, A Company launched an attack westward along the southern ridge leading to Maryang San, encountering only light opposition. By 1:40 p.m., a company had secured a position approximately 1,000 meters southeast of Hill 317. At 2 p.m., D Company resumed its westward advance. With close artillery, Centurion tanks, and Vickers machine guns in support, they launched a determined assault on CCF positions atop 2 small hillocks along the ridge. Once again, the enemy defenses were found to be laterally arrayed and oriented to the south, which hindered the Chinese from effectively repositioning their fixed machine guns against the advancing Australians. After an intense firefight, the Australians charged into the CCF positions, forcing the Chinese to retreat from their trenches. By 4 p.m., D Company had secured the 2 hillocks. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett ordered Lieutenant Young to hold his position, reorganize D Company, and be ready for another company to move through as they advanced to the next phase of the assault. Hassett was determined to maintain the momentum of the attack, convinced that the Chinese were on the back foot and adamant that a swift assault would bring down Hill 317. C Company was ordered to advance and assault Hill 317, while B and D companies were granted a rest following the battles. Captain Gerke had quickly moved C Company across the valley and into a forming up position on the southern slopes of the northern ridge between B Company and D Company. They would first attack an intermediate feature 600 meters east to Hill 317. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett had coordinated fire support onto this feature, subjecting it to 15 minutes of artillery and mortar fire, while machine guns and fire from the tanks would cover the final approach to the position. About 4:15 p.m., a flight of 4 F-51s attacked the feature north of Hill 217, causing CCF to flee north. After 4:15 p.m., Captain Gerke assigned Lieutenant McWilliams' 8th Platoon the task of clearing the intermediate feature. Upon reaching the Chinese position, McWilliam observed that many enemy combatants were dead, wounded, or dazed from the preceding bombardment. He then captured 7 prisoners and secured the position. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett redirected supporting fire onto Hill 317, a decisive move to bolster C Company's advance. Approaching Hill 317 from the east presents a formidable challenge, as the steep cliffs require climbers to scramble on both hands and knees at times. Leading the assault, Lieutenant Pear's 7th Platoon began the arduous climb up the bare, conically shaped hill, with Lieutenant Pembroke's 9th Platoon closely following as they advanced toward the CCF position. Notably, as the Australians neared the summit, they encountered no enemy fire. The position had been vacated, with a lone Chinese soldier seen fleeing north. By 5 p.m., Hill 317 was securely in Australian hands. C Company had suffered no casualties, while the Fusiliers, after fiercely battling around Hill 217, were forced to withdraw down the slope.
Surprise, speed and aggression had won the day.
In the afternoon, A Company continued its assault along the southern ridge leading to Hill 317, targeting a CCF position on a feature located approximately 500 meters southeast of the hill. At 3:15 p.m., A Company began making progress by clearing the enemy outpost on the ridge, and by 4:45 p.m., A Company had successfully secured the linking feature to Hill 317.
And then, at the end of the day, when C Company had eventually got to the top of Maryang San, led by the famous Jack Kirk, and that really was a big hill. Anyway, they got to the top.
By 5:30 p.m., after completing its reorganization, the company began consolidating its positions. McWilliams' 8th Platoon was called forward. Shortly after the capture of Hill 317, the Chinese opened fire on C Company with mortars and machine guns. Anticipating a counterattack, the men quickly dug in to take cover and strengthen their defenses before nightfall. Hassett aimed to consolidate C Company's position by instructing Captain Shelton to detach a platoon from a company to provide support.
The CO came up on the air to me. He knew where we were. He said, "You've got to get a platoon up there and you've got to pull back."
The rest of a company withdrew to the main battalion headquarters on Hill 199. Throughout the night, Australian forces stationed on Hill 317 and the surrounding ridgelines to the east endured sporadic indirect fire, though they rested as much as possible in preparation for the days ahead. Meanwhile, the CCF maintained control of positions to the west of Hill 317, as well as the terrain extending toward and including Hill 217 on the central spur. At first light on October 6, in heavy mist, Lieutenant Pembroke's 9th Platoon left the perimeter of C Company to attack a feature approximately 500 meters west of Hill 317. This operation was designed to add depth to C Company's forward defenses. As they advanced, the Australians crawled through dense woodland and tall grass before hurling grenades at the CCF position. The Chinese, who had not been on high alert at that hour, were caught completely off guard. After securing his position, Pembroke immediately began consolidating it. With an understrength platoon, covering the approaches from the south and west proved to be a considerable challenge. CCF casualties from this section were 19 killed in action and 3 prisoners. C Company were 1 killed in action. During the day, the 9th Platoon successfully held the position by repelling several counterattacks from the CCF. This new position proved critical in protecting the immediate flank of C Company's position on Hill 317 and in supporting further westward advances. During both the morning and the afternoon of the 6th, the UN Air Force focused on targeting reported CCF activity in villages behind the front lines. Throughout the 5th and the 6th of October, 1 RNF mounted determined assaults on Hill 217 and a nearby feature. Despite their courageous efforts, heavy enemy opposition inflicted nearly 100 casualties, preventing them from securing either position. On the afternoon of October 6, it became clear that the CCF positions on Hill 217 could only be taken from the north by 3 RAR. B Company moved to assume the position previously held by the 9th Platoon of C Company before dusk. Meanwhile, A Company 1 KOSB was ordered to occupy a company position formerly held by B Company. In doing so, it came under the command of 3 RAR for the duration of the tasking. B Company's mission was to capture a tactically significant feature approximately 500 meters west of their current position. The feature was named the Hinge, marking the apex of the complex that included Hill 317 and its neighboring heights. From there, a spur line extended south, encompassing Hill 217. The Chinese were well entrenched, fully aware of the likely direction of attack, and determined to defend their position tenaciously. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett believed once this feature was secured, Hill 217 would become indefensible, forcing the CCF to withdraw. Early in the morning, UN forces delivered intense supporting fire on the CCF positions using artillery, tanks, and machine guns. This enabled B Company to advance close to the enemy lines and be ready to breach them as soon as the suppressive fire lifted. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett and his tactical headquarters would also coordinate supporting arms from Hill 317, which offered a clear vantage point over the attacking force. At 8 a.m., as the mist was beginning to clear, B Company moved out while C Company advanced to secure its designated positions. Captain Nichols led 2 platoons forward and held 1 in reserve, Lieutenant Hughes' 4 platoon on the left, Lieutenant Falvey's 6 platoon on the right, and company headquarters with Sergeant Ray Perry's 5 platoon bringing up the rear. B Company moved on to the eastern edge of the feature without incident, and the lead platoons were surprised to find the enemy bunkers unoccupied. However, as 5 platoon and company headquarters approached from the rear, they came under attack from both sides of the ridge. The Chinese had pulled back into a defilade, allowing the lead platoons to pass before ambushing the trailing elements at very close range. Captain Nichols' headquarters and Perry's 5 platoon returned fire on both flanks, while 4 and 6 platoons fought their way back to rejoin them. After multiple firefights, brutal hand-to-hand engagements, and regrouping, B Company once again advanced toward the CCF position. By 9:30 a.m., B Company had repelled the local counterattacks and was consolidating on the ridge. For the remainder of the day, B and C Company's positions came under intense and precise artillery fire. B Company successfully repelled 2 CCF counterattacks in the afternoon. To support 3 RAR's operations, the UN Air Force dispatched 2 flights of 8 F-51s each to attack CCF artillery positions located about 8 kilometers northwest of the Australian positions at 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. The pilots achieved excellent results, striking multiple artillery pieces. The 31st CCF Artillery Regiment confirmed that 11 pieces of Soviet howitzer were damaged during the battle. We'll cover the details of the CCF report later in this video. All the companies on the northern ridge had dug in the captured Chinese positions. Telephone lines were laid to connect them with battalion headquarters, while casualty evacuation and urgently needed resupply efforts were underway. The battalion was as prepared as possible to defend its hard-won gains.
I mean, when we took 317 and then took the feature in front of it, you'd have to be pretty damn stupid not to realize, I would have to be, that we are going to be counterattacked. And so they did, they counterattacked very heavily, and we expected it and we dealt with it. But that's pretty orthodox stuff. I don't recall that they had any particular wizardry, if I can use that word. They were pretty good soldiers.
At 8 p.m., the Chinese opened a 45-minute barrage on both B and C companies,
exploding in the trees, and causing a lot of casualties and a lot of damage, plus the fact that it was pretty hard on the nerves. I think it frightened the living daylights out of all and sundry.
During the Battle of Maryang San, the Chinese expended around 8,100 artillery rounds and approximately 7,800 mortar rounds. However, while this may seem relatively modest compared to the volume of fire from UN artillery and mortar units, the Chinese were already equipped with Soviet howitzers at the time. Reportedly, the 31st CCF Artillery Regiment fired 4,589 rounds from 36 of these powerful guns in support of the 571st CCF Regiment, primarily targeting 3 RAR's positions. As soon as the bombardment lifted, flares lit the night sky, and Chinese forces attacked along every spur leading to B Company.
And then the Chinese attacked, but they came from several different routes. I was just trying to think. I think they hit 4 platoon first, if I remember rightly.
Chinese records indicate that the 191st CCF Division committed 4 companies to this attack, aiming to retake Hill 317 and its surrounding features. They advanced in successive waves. A heavy mist blanketed the area, allowing the CCF to approach, and at times penetrate, the Australian perimeters. Throughout this period, the men of B and C companies, entrenched in their positions, engaged the enemy with small arms and grenades. Short on ammunition, the Australians met the enemy at close quarters in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Attacks were throughout the night until 5 a.m. when the CCF withdrew. The engagement resulted in about 120 CCF casualties. 3 RAR remained on L 317 and the surrounding high ground.
Basically overnight. The Chinese were still messing around at dawn, but they were mainly concerned with getting their bods out there, and then we left them pretty well alone. Yeah, it finished. I wouldn't like to say, but maybe a couple of hours before dawn, something like that. In the last night of the Maryang San battle, there were over 100 dead and wounded lying just outside B Company's position. And we had a lot of artillery which would use to good effect and really enabled us to get onto the features and then to hold them.
Despite heavy fire, courageous Korean porters brought in ammunition and evacuated wounded Australians on stretchers. Meanwhile, American, British, and New Zealand artillery and mortars tore through the ranks of the attacking Chinese. During the night, the 1st Commonwealth Division's divisional artillery reportedly expended 11,382 rounds. Australian casualties from the night totaled 13 dead and 30 wounded, most of whom were hit by Chinese shelling. There was no heavy morning mist. At first light, Chinese stretcher-bearers advanced under a flag of truce to retrieve their dead and wounded.
The Chinese came out. They didn't like having dead and wounded lying about in no man's land. They'd come out to retrieve them, help them. Our company commander called for more artillery fire, and the gunner who was with him, the FOO, Forward Observation Officer, a young New Zealand subaltern, he said, "Oh, no, sir, something like this, I haven't quite got the right pattern. Remember, everybody is in a state of shock after 6, or 7, or 8 days of battle, and near battle, you are in a rather strange mental state. I think you just want to put your head down and pass out." So I don't think the company commander, in calling for fire, was being deliberately cruel or callous. But the young FOO, he said, "Oh, no, so we didn't fire and they got their men out." And I think that would have spread through the Chinese. I think they were inclined that way. The North Koreans were not. They were very cruel people. Well, that is right. And you would appreciate, I think, that soldiers fighting one another, they form an appreciation of the courage and skill of their opponents, and on occasions, only very rare occasions, it does come out, a bit of a truce or what have you.
Across the entire regiment, the 3rd, 4th, and 8th companies performed the best in battlefield casualty evacuation, managing to drag out many wounded.
As 3 RAR secured and held Maryang San, the CCF positions on L 217 and in the surrounding area were cut off from support, leaving them with no option but to withdraw.
The battle in the direction of the 3rd Battalion was extremely intense. By the end of the engagement, only a dozen men remained in the 7th Company after continuous repulses of multiple enemy attacks. On the 7th, we launched 4 consecutive counterattacks to retake Hill 280, but the enemy ultimately secured it before midnight. Despite multiple assaults on Hill 217, the enemy failed to capture it. Later, due to isolation, we voluntarily withdrew at dawn on the 8th.
At 9:00 a.m., 2 companies of 1 KOSB moved up to the summit and relieved B and C companies. Between 12:10 p.m. and 12:25 p.m., 8 F-51s attacked CCF positions on Hill 217 and the adjacent feature to its north, employing rockets and napalm. By late afternoon, the Fusiliers had secured Hill 217 without resistance. From night until dawn on the 9th, a squad-sized CCF force approached Hill 317, and both sides exchanged hand grenades. No friendly casualties were reported. Throughout the day on the 9th, 3 RAR repositioned and consolidated their defenses. The 1st Commonwealth Division successfully reached the Jamestown line, fulfilling its objectives for Operation Commando. General O'Daniel, then commanding general of the 1st Corps, congratulated the division on October 9th.
It was a masterful maneuver skillfully combining aggressiveness and complete, detailed planning, resulting in the taking of key terrain features with a minimum cost in manpower and with full exploitation of available firepower.
The 28th Commonwealth Brigade inflicted heavy casualties on the CCF, with a total of 808 counted losses. 3 RAR accounted for more than half of them. Meanwhile, the UN forces also paid an unavoidable price. Among the 28th Commonwealth Brigade's casualties, 3 RAR suffered comparatively heavier losses, with 19 killed in action and 95 wounded in action. Both 3 RAR's own casualties and the losses it inflicted on the CCF resulted from its engagement with more CCF units than the other 3 battalions in the brigade combined. Please allow me to clarify the details using both sides' records. The 28th Brigade's intelligence assessed that 3 CCF regiments were deployed as follows. The 572nd Regiment held the southern sector, while the 571st Regiment was positioned in the north with its 3rd and 1st Battalions centered on Maryang San and Maryang San, and its 2nd Battalion in reserve to the west of both hills. Meanwhile, the 573rd Regiment was kept as the division's reserve. When the 28th Brigade launched its attack westward, Brigade intelligence initially believed that the 1st Battalion, King's Own Scottish Borderers, and the 1st Battalion, King's Shropshire Light Infantry were engaging the 9th Company of the 572nd CCF Regiment, as well as the entire 3rd Battalion of the 571st CCF Regiment, both supported by smaller units, in the Maryang San area. However, Chinese records indicate that only the 9th Company of the 571st CCF Regiment was assigned to defend Hill 355, Maryang San, while the 7th Company defended Hill 217. Prisoner of war interrogation reports support this. For instance, Li Xingwang, an assistant company commander of the 9th Company, 571st CCF Regiment, was captured by 1 KOSB on October 3. He stated that he and the 2nd Platoon of the 9th Company were deployed on a feature southeast of Hill 355, with the remainder of the 9th Company holding Hill 355 itself. The 8th Company was positioned 750 meters west of Maryang San, and the 7th Company, along with the 3rd Battalion Command Post, remained in houses 1,200 meters northwest of Maryang San. From these details, it appears that 1 KOSB and 1 KSLI primarily engaged the 9th Company of the 571st CCF Regiment, the 9th Company of the 572nd CCF Regiment, and elements of the 8th Company of the 571st Regiment, a total of at most 3 rifle companies in the Maryang San area. C Company of 3 RAR was also involved in the fighting. When the 1st Battalion, Royal Northumberland Fusiliers attacked Hill 217, they primarily clashed with the 7th Company of the 571st CCF Regiment, effectively just 1 rifle company, as noted earlier. However, the battle on 3RAR's front involved far more CCF units than those faced by the other battalions. At the outset, the CCF deployed its 1st and 2nd Companies, the 571st CCF Regiment, on the northern ridge east of Hill 317, while the 3rd Company occupied the hill itself. The 191st CCF Division then committed all 3 companies of its 2nd Battalion to defend Hill 317 and the surrounding terrain. Additionally, the 2nd Battalion of the 573rd Regiment was positioned as the reserve for the 571st Regiment near Maryang San. As 3RAR advanced westward, they successfully neutralized positions held by all 6 rifle companies from the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 571st Regiment. In doing so, they also engaged elements of the 2nd Battalion of the 573rd Regiment during the battle. As previously noted, the 28th Commonwealth Brigade dismantled around 10 CCF rifle companies in total, delivering a substantial blow to the enemy's strength. Of those, 3RAR alone accounted for 6, demonstrating that it carried out the lion's share of the brigade's effort. Let's examine the casualties reported by the CCF. This table shows the 571st CCF Regiment's losses between October 3 and October 13. The 1st and 2nd Battalions suffered 98 and 55 killed in action, respectively, along with 52 and 107 wounded. These combined losses resulting from engagements with 3RAR were higher than the 3rd Battalion's 54 killed and 85 wounded, which were inflicted by the other 3 battalions of the 28th Brigade, given that the 572nd Regiment reported 30 KIA, 67 WIA, and 27 MIA. Obviously, Australians played a pivotal role in the Battle of Maryang San. The assault on Maryang San by the 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, was meticulously planned and expertly carried out, forming a key component of a larger brigade maneuver supported by divisional assets. Under Lieutenant Colonel Hassett's leadership, the battalion overcame challenging terrain and fierce resistance, demonstrating disciplined coordination, tactical ingenuity, and unwavering resolve. Their success, which greatly advanced the brigade's broader objectives, rightly instilled in both Hassett and his men a profound sense of pride in their accomplishment. The men of 3RAR also benefited from the UN forces' timely and accurate artillery support. Over the course of the battle, the divisional artillery fired more than 60,000 rounds, at least 7 times the amount used by the CCF artillery. For decades following the Battle of Maryang San, the CCF believed that the surprisingly powerful attack, characterized by a rapid flanking maneuver up the ridge from the right, had been launched by 2 battalions of the U.S. Army's 5th Cavalry Regiment, who had crossed the Imjin River. This misconception was due to the speed and force of the assault executed by the Australians, which left a lasting impression on the CCF. I might say the Australian Army staged a truly fair advance during the battle. Operation Commando should have been Taylor's crowning achievement. However, under circumstances that remain unclear, he was controversially relieved of command on October 25 and sent back to the United Kingdom. Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald, commanding officer of the 1 KOSB, succeeded him. It was suggested that MacDonald, at every opportunity, belittled the Australians and their remarkable achievements in the Battle of Maryang San.
I didn't get on well with one of the brigade commanders, not that we ever had any argument over anything, but I didn't like him and he didn't like me, and he didn't like Australians. He was jealous of their performance on Maryang San, I think.
November 1951, the 572nd and the 573rd CCF Regiments of the 191st CCF Division, with support from artillery and tanks, launched a massive offensive against Hill 317 and surrounding features. After fierce fighting, the borderers were forced off the position. The hill remained under Chinese control for the rest of the war. Today it sits within North Korea. In late autumn, the layered mountain peaks were bathed in shades of brown and yellow, and the fields lay deserted. Yet wild chrysanthemums dotted the hillsides, blooming brightly. I couldn't help thinking if there were no war, how beautiful this landscape would be. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, DSO, for his leadership throughout the protracted and bloody campaign. That wraps up our in-depth timeline of the Battle of Maryang San. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support helps us continue producing high-quality content.